Now that we're done with the first full year, and a little bit extra, of the Game Boy's library, I thought it'd be fun to take a quick look back at the top 10 best and worst games released on the system between 1989 and 1990. For reference, there were a grand total of 152 games that came out worldwide during this time period, and we've now managed to look at all of them on the channel. So, what makes these lists different from all the other top 10, 20, 100 games lists you've read or watched before on YouTube? Well, for one thing, I've not just picked out the most well-known or obvious titles that you know already and just wanged them in a list. If you've been following my channel, you'll know that I've reviewed every single game released in 89 to 90, even the stupidly bad or obscure ones, and given them carefully considered scores. Go check if you don't believe me, they're all there. I've then actually done the maths and put all these scores in an ascending order that we more commonly refer to as counting. It's still one man's opinion, of course, but I'd put money down that it's the most thoroughly researched opinion you'll ever come across. Once all the results were tabulated, this became nigh impossible to narrow down to 10. If you buy the book when it comes out, you'll see I rank each game a score out of 10 for graphics, sound, and gameplay, then give a final mark out of 30. A lot of games ended up with the same score once it all came down to it, so if I'd done a cutoff point, these lists would have been about 25 games long. It gets a bit redundant at that point. So I've been slightly liberal and used my judgment in places, awarding the spots to the games I think you should play, or avoid, above the others, even if only slightly. It's not just the score, universal appeal definitely comes into it. These lists are the games that everyone should play, even if you're not a fan of the genre. You could make a case for virtually any of the games that didn't make the cut, which is testament to the strength of the Game Boy library if nothing else. And please, debate away, I'd love to hear your thoughts and your top 10 lists. Remember, this list is only for titles that first came out in 1989 or 1990. It's not a top 10 overall. I wouldn't even know where to begin with something like that. Super Mario Land. While not actually scoring as highly as some of the others on this list, mainly getting docked points due to the weaker graphics, which is maybe slightly unfair seeing as how this is a launch title, Mario's first portable adventure is absolutely essential for anyone wanting to explore the most iconic Game Boy games there ever was. It was in the bestseller charts from launch and never really left it throughout the whole lifespan of the console. Rye Fighter Deluxe. A remarkable port of the classic NES shoot-'em-up that took everything great about the original and somehow got it to work on the Game Boy. Not only is it faithful, it's an absolutely brilliant game in its own right. Ghostbusters II. There were several not very good 8-bit Ghostbusters games, but the Game Boy ones were actually great. This one in particular, inventive game mechanics where you team up with a CPU character to paralyze and then vacuum up all manner of ghosties. Revenge of the Gator. There's no way this should have been as good as it was coming out in the 80s. The pinball physics in Revenge of the Gator were never really topped on the system. There were a handful of other pinball games on Game Boy, but the only one that came close to this was Kirby's Pinball Land. Funnily enough, that was made by the same people. 6. Nemesis. Konami showed us that they truly had command when it came to shoot-'em-ups on the Game Boy, with at least 4 awesome ones that I can think of off the top of my head. This was the earliest, and while it might lack a smidgen of polish that we saw with its successor Gradius, it's still an outrageously strong entry in the series, and wouldn't be bested in the genre for quite a while. Five. DuckTales. What is there to say about DuckTales that hasn't been said a million times already? Everything you loved about the NES title is here too. The music is just as good, the controls to die for. Disney put their flag firmly in the ground with this one, and went on to release tons of Game Boy games. Not many came close to DuckTales though. Four. Bubble Ghost. Not only was Bubble Ghost faithful to the original, it improved on it massively. Some of the most accurate, pixel-perfect hit detection and a real finesse to the controls makes this unique, skill-based puzzler a real treat to blow through time and again. In fact, I might go play it right now. Cat Rap. On a system that had an abundance of both great puzzle games and really heckin' cute playable characters, you've got to go some to make a game that excels in both of these things. There's no jeopardy to be found here, nothing can kill you, and the revolutionary for the time rewinding mechanic ensured that you couldn't really even fail a level. However, when something captures the essence of what a puzzle game should be as perfectly as this does, and being utterly charming doing it, you can't help but love it. Two. Final Fantasy Legend II. All 4 Final Fantasy games might have been rebranded versions of other things, but who really cares when they're this good? If Zelda-style sword wavers were your thing, the excellent Final Fantasy adventure filled the void beautifully until Link's Awakening came out. If the more traditional turn-based adventures better suit your tastes, then there's an absolutely impeccable trilogy, the first 2 of which we've already seen by the time 1990 was done. This middle game was the peak of the series, with one of the most involving storylines of any RPG on the Game Boy. Before we find out what's number 1, as if you hadn't worked it out already, here are some honourable mentions and why they didn't quite make the cut. Aretha. I was desperate to put this on the list as it's one of my favourite RPGs on the whole system, and it started an amazing trilogy off. The problem is, it's in pretty high-level Japanese with no translation patches, meaning it's closed off to most people. When I get around to doing my top 10 Japanese exclusives list, it'll 100% be on there, so look forward to that. Gargoyle's Quest. If the RPG sections in Gargoyle's Quest had a bit more substance to them, instead of feeling tacked on, this game would have been an all-time classic. Still, it's definitely worth checking out. Poppin' Twinbee. This is brilliant and you should play it, but Konami put out so many good shoot-em-ups, there's one on this list for heck's sake, that it's tough to make the case that Poppin' Twinbee is essential. Radar Mission and Battleship. These two games, surprisingly, ranked really highly, above some of the ones that actually made the list. I bumped them off due to their potential lack of universal appeal. Realistically, they're not going to be as popular with as wide an audience as the others, so ultimately it's a judgment call. And finally, 1. Tetris. Well, obviously, not sure what else you expected. Probably the best falling block puzzle game ever made. In fact, definitely the best one. And the Game Boy game, in many people's opinion, including the guy who designed the game, by the way, is the best version of it. For the most quintessential game on a Nintendo console to not be a Mario game says something to how iconic this is. The ultimate definition of just one more run, Tetris for Game Boy captivated young and old, gamer and non-gamer alike, and absolutely propelled the Game Boy into video game superstardom. You'd have to think the console would have been nowhere near as successful without it. So that's our list of the top 10 Game Boy games released in 1989 and 1990. Do you agree with the list? What would you swap out? Let me know in the comments below, and tune in next weekend for the absolute worst 10 in the same bracket. What do you predict will be on there? Thanks so much for watching this video. Let me know your thoughts on the game down below, and if you can spare a second, give the review a quick thumbs up, it really helps out. Subscribe to the Portable Power Podcast for a new Game Boy review every day from Monday to Friday. Or alternately, new episodes of the podcast drop every Saturday and Sunday on whichever platform you get your pods. See you later on.